The Last of Us show on HBO has it's premiering this next Sunday. The reviews are out. IGN's Simon Cardy, a regular on this show, he gave it a 9 out of 10. Big fan of it. A bunch of us have been watching it. We are going to talk about it in a very spoiler-free context. Who wants to go first? Brian, you finished the whole thing.
Yes, I did. I figure we can start on me, so it gives Akeem a second to remove that Ninja Turtle from the shot.
Take it, get it out of here.
Is it that creepy?
Yes.
Well, when we clip this part out and people don't know what happened in the episode, they're going to be like, "Oh, wow, this show sounds cool." But anyway, I have some questions. So I'm going to be completely spoiler free. I'll even remain spoiler free on the video games. But The Last of Us on HBO launches this Sunday. It's, I think, probably one of the most, if not the most impressive video game adaptation I've seen yet. And I was thinking a lot about why it works specifically. One, it's incredibly well made. It's done by the people who worked on the games, but also Craig Mazin, who recently a few years ago did Chernobyl, which is phenomenal. The leads are incredible. They are Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey do an amazing job of taking on Joel and Ellie and kind of making it their own. The season basically adapts the first game plus some other stuff, and I think why it works so well for me was that going into the show I was really apprehensive about this working, specifically because I was kind of like, we don't need this. The game is phenomenal and cinematic and does everything it needs to do to tell that story already. I would rather people just go and play the game. But what this show does is it gets to dig into some corners that wouldn't necessarily be interesting in a video game format. It gets to tell some stories that I think probably would have died being just cutscenes in a game that wouldn't live as well. And in a show, they get to kind of cook and live out a little bit longer. It gets to go into some pockets of this world after it's been torn apart and tell some stories and focus on some characters and expand on some things in ways that the game didn't get to do. And so my apprehension about this show was not only killed, but I'm also completely in love with it. And I think it's fully justified its existence, its runtime over 9 episodes. And the fact that it works not only as a companion piece to the game for people who love the game, but also as kind of DLC. It tells a whole bunch of new stories, shows a whole bunch of new things, and also gives a bunch of nods and Easter eggs to the game itself. So I think if you like the game, you're going to absolutely love this show. I think if you've never played the game, but you love horror or you love prestige HBO shows or you love shows where shocking shit happens and horrible things go down, you're one of those weirdos like me that enjoys that, you're going to love the hell out of this show.
You mentioned about how certain things kind of like the format, works better in TV versus games. There's a lot of features that, they change throughout the show that, the news has been out, it's been shared, like there's no spores in the show. Like they went for a different avenue, and it's because certain things in games just don't really make sense when translated to movies or TV shows, which is why we often get these adaptations that are slightly off from the game counter component of it.
Right.
And it makes sense. Like you don't want certain things to be one to one. Like there's just certain things that just don't make sense. Like I don't want to see like button mashing, context sensitive stuff, anything that in a game that would have that, it didn't make sense to put that in there, like into it. Like obviously no movie or TV show is going to put like buttons on the screen, like Pedro Pascal's like trying to choke someone out.
Someone's going to go in and add that as like a.
Oh, somebody totally will.
Yeah.
It would probably be us, to be honest. But I agree with you, Brian. Like I'm only halfway through the season so far, and it's just so fantastic. It's so well shot. The pacing is like breakneck speed, nonstop. Like it just keeps moving from story beat to story beat to story beat. And like I've noticed a few things that have like had small sequence breaks, but at the end of the episode, at the end of that point versus where that point would have been in the game, the end result is basically the same. Yeah. Like you're getting the same package, you're just getting it in a different way. You're seeing it in a different way, a more detailed way in certain areas and a more skimmed over way in other areas that don't make sense to translate over.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest, I was dreading this show. I've had sort of a bittersweet relationship with The Last of Us. Like I loved the first game when it came out. I was a huge fan of it. When the second one came out, it was early peak pandemic, and also there was all that toxic bullshit leading into it.
Yep.
And it just soured me on it. And I played a bit, and then I was like, this is very well made. I'm cool. And I walked away. I still haven't finished it. So going into this, I was like, okay, what's it going to do? Like, this is already an extremely cinematic story. It's been told really well once. I was legitimately like, what is this going to do that's going to possibly move the needle? And yeah, I'm completely sold. I'm 100% on board. It makes me want to go back and properly actually, finish the series and honestly revisit the first one. It is phenomenally well done. It's honestly like if you went back, I don't know, 5 years and you were like, so you're gonna sob like a baby watching a video game TV show from the writer of Scary Movies 3 and 4, I would be like, you have the wrong person, my dear sir. That won't be me. But yeah, this has like, I love Chernobyl. That's some of my favorite TV maybe ever, and that's Craig Mazin. There's enough of that in this that it works really well. The performances are rock solid. Like, it's just, and again, to your point, there are game mechanics that are really fun in game, and they just don't work in, like a passive medium. Like, they just don't work. It's like watching somebody, mow down like hordes of enemies in like if you're just sitting there watching it, like, sure, you can have something like The Raid or, John Wick, where it's like, this is interesting, this is entertaining, this works. But again, like, it's not quite as much fun in the same way that like watching somebody, I don't know, solve a puzzle in a show or something isn't quite as much fun as solving it yourself in a game. And in this case, I think they adapted what works in the game really well. And again, it's also like it does a really good job of stopping down and letting things breathe, like letting people, properly enjoy that. But it's, yeah, I'm completely on board. I'm like 4 episodes in. There's my
watch the show
thorough endorsement. And
yeah, we kind of talked about this off air a little bit. Brian, I know you're far ahead. You finished this season, so this is a question I'm pretty sure a lot of fans would want to know. I think you said earlier that it adapts the first game, part 1, correct?
Yeah.
So I guess as a fan of the franchise, as someone who's played the parts 1 and 2, I guess the question I would have, like, moving forward, do we think like season 2 will just adapt part 2, or do we think there's enough content in part 1 of the video game to kind of like flesh out to season 3? Because we already know that Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, they already stated last week in an article, in an interview, that they have no plans of going beyond parts 1 and 2 of the video game. So
beyond,
I guess the question is, how many more seasons do we see The Last of Us, the HBO series, having?
Right. Well, they stated that they wanted to cover, or that basically the second game is roughly like twice the length of the first game, and so that you would need 2 seasons for that, bare minimum, right? Outside of that, I do wonder if they just shut it down and they go, we've told everything we need to tell, or they get into a weird situation that Game of Thrones got to, where like the narrative of the television show is eclipsing that of the source material. And that's like an interesting problem to have, because at the same exact time, video game development takes a long time, right? Like Jason Schreier tweeted the other day about like a game that started development now would basically have to come out for PlayStation 6. Like, that's just how long it takes to make a AAA game now. I don't know how long Naughty Dog's been working on part 3, if that's something that like they're actively invested in while also working on the multiplayer side of things that they've been doing for years now. But I love this world. I also don't want it to overstay its welcome. They have repeatedly said, we do not want to make another zombie show. And we can all kind of like address the elephant in the room. And that's The Walking Dead, which kind of ended with a whimper after, 12 seasons, multiple spinoffs that are getting multiple seasons, potential movies or projects and all this other stuff like that. I don't know if I want them to go that way. Although I love the world they're building here. I love the characters they're building here. I'll gladly take several more seasons of this. It takes a while for a show to kind of fall off. If you look at some of my favorite shows in history, got like 5 or 6 seasons, stuff like The Wire, Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, Mad Men. Game of Thrones got like a little too far into it, kind of lost the plot a lot towards the end. But I like what they're building here. I don't know if they want to build this out into this whole thing where they start doing spin-offs and all this other stuff. I mean, you look at what they did with Game of Thrones at HBO right now. There's House of the Dragon, which is a prequel season. They're making the Jon Snow show. Like, there is a potential here for them to run this into the ground, or maybe like build content around it that works and helps. But if they just want to stick to the games, which I think they can do, I think they can do this in 3 seasons.
Yeah, and to your point, Brian, I feel like the way these types of shows, you know, veer off track and lose like the enthusiasm from the audience is the fact that, you know, they have like a clear blueprint, and when you veer off that blueprint, then you kind of like lose the audience, and that's exactly what The Walking Dead did, you know, with Carl dying, and then of course the whole Negan situation where he killed one person that was still alive in the comic, and then he killed the actual. It was just they veered too far off the blueprint that was already laid out, and I mean that was on purpose, like, you know, because, you know, Robert Kirkman was associated with the writing of the series, so he purposely wanted to do what if situations in the show, which, I mean, again, the audience they just weren't having it, and so like you saw like a dip off of viewership, and then of course you just start to look at this as like, all right, this is a money making machine, so yeah, let's make a bunch of different spin-offs, and let's make some movies, turn those movies into shows instead of movies. And I'm hoping that they don't go that way with The Last of Us.
I mean, less is more.
Yeah.
The two things I really sort of cling to for this is like Chernobyl is 6 episodes and they were done. That was it. And it's like, it's rock solid because of that. And then also looking at, you know, known IP getting the HBO treatment, Watchmen was fantastic. And then, you know, Damon Lindelof is kind of infamous for not knowing how to end stuff necessarily, you know, like the, you know, Lost left a lot of people unhappy, and that had, you know, a whole other can of worms. But like the fact that, you know, Watchmen was such a huge hit, and then they came around, they were like, yeah, that's it, we're done, bye.
Yep.
And that you don't get that a whole lot. Like everything is so much about like known IP and existing franchises, and I really hope that, you know, The Last of Us gets that same.
I think having more shows that have that kind of finite end like that would kind of help alleviate some of the pains that people have about like shows starting and then getting canceled after a season. Like if we have more of these shows that we're used to telling a complete story in 1 season, maybe 2, maybe 3, whatever, and then just ending, we'd have a lot less pain about dealing with like, oh, I really like the show, I hope it doesn't get canceled after season 1. Like, you wouldn't have to worry about that as much. It wouldn't be as prevalent in the industry as it is.
Yeah. Well, luckily this show's not on Netflix. That's a good that's a good starting point.
Safe sign.
But also, if you think about how you felt when The Last of Us ended, the first game, right? In 2013, we're talking about a decade ago. That felt finite, right? And then felt conclusive. And then you started to hear ideas about the sequel. You started to hear like rumors, and then trailers, and then leaks, and all the other stuff. We went through that whole life cycle. But like, to me, I was like that, you know, that sequel, I loved the sequel, and I thought it like completely justified its existence. But if it had never happened, I would have also been fine with the way the first one ended. And so if for some miraculous reason, which I don't see happening because this show has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and a ton of buzz around it, this show tanks and we don't get a second season, then it does end in a way where you're like, okay, cool, got it. You know, I feel not good about that, but I feel complete for now, you know, with all its moral skepticism and horrors. So.
And I know, like Neil Druckmann said in an interview recently, that there's more story to tell in The Last of Us after part 2. So who knows? Maybe we get, you know, season 2 for the show announced soon after the first one finishes, and then, you know, down the road, once we see part 3, maybe we get a part 3 show. But I mean, it's
The Road is actually a different post-apocalyptic journey between parent
like
and child.
Hops,
whatever.
and you got to go across planks and
The Last of Us only borrows extremely heavily from it, but yeah. But yeah, Jada, we might get a situation where like you ever, you know, you're watching a show on TV and like it's 1 episode in, and you wake up the next day and you open IGN and there's a press release that says the show got renewed, and you're like, oh wow, a lot of people must have watched that shit last night. So maybe we'll get that in this situation. I think that would be really awesome.